Hi, welcome to the first of a series of webinars where we will be talking about different requirements for the Cybersecure Canada Certification Program, or Journey, as we like to call it. My name is Victor Beitner, and I'll be introducing Julien Richard, who has worked with us for a couple of years doing penetration testing. And a little bit about ourselves. To the next slide. Yeah. This is about the webinar. You are automatically muted on entry. If you have any questions, we have a chat function below. We will share the recording after the event if you want it. And take our polls. We have some very simple questions just to get an idea of what people are thinking about the webinar and the program. So next. Okay, so a little bit about us. Cybersecurity Canada, we're a team of professionals. We have well over 30 years experience. Between the team, if we add the team together, the number's too high. It's too scary. We offer SMEs, subject matter expert practitioners, who work with organizations to get them through the process, through the program, with policies and templates, testing requirements that are met. We help them guide them through evidence collection. We have a complete process to help any organization, large or small, go through this whole process. A little about us: we were listed number 6 in Canada for the cybersecurity list for a couple of years. This goes back a little bit of time. One of the top 50 cybersecurity company businesses, 2021. Again, it's all history. Our business is talking about the future. We are an internationally accredited certification body by the Standards Council of Canada, which is a partner with ISO. So what we are is basically an ISO company. And we're also, the company was involved in the creation, the expert drafting, the creation, and the final approvals of the official Canadian standard. So we do have a little bit of a knowledge about our process and the programs. And I think if you have any questions, just put them in the chat at any time. I'd love to hear any feedback, positive or negative. We're an ISO company, so we need criticism. If you have any issues with anything, with the cybersecure, with our company, with anything, we need feedback. And I'd like to introduce to you now is Julien, and he will take it from here.
Thank you, Victor. Really appreciate it. I will go off camera after introducing myself. I just wanted people to be familiar with who I am and who's speaking. If you have any problems with the audio, please let me know. As you can see, I've got a mic here and I can move it around, so just let me know. All right, I'm going to go off camera now, and I'm going to be a lot more comfortable speaking without having to worry about what I look like. So just a little overview of who I am. Like Victor said, I have been working with cybersecurity for a few years now as a consultant. As you can see here on the second point there, I do have a consultant company which I help out different companies, including Victor. I've done a lot of work with them. Great company. But I'm also a director of information security at a company called Last Wall here in New Brunswick, Canada. I did found the Atlantic Cybersecurity Collective. If you're interested, that's just a group. There's no committees or anything like that. It's just a bunch of geeks that get together and we talk security. So it's a lot of fun. I also do a bunch of security research. My take on certifications, one of my mentors told me once, when you do a cert, the best way to get your continuing professional credits, CPEs, just take another cert. It'll give you a bunch of hours to apply to the next one. So that's why I have a certs, and they're kind of fun to take too. Other than being a tech geek, I love being in the mountains. So 2023 has looked a lot like a bunch of skiing from my point of view. My contact information is there. They're also on the last slides. Feel free to reach out at any time. I love talking to everybody, anybody, no matter what your experience level is. If you've got 30 years experience in the industry, that's great. If you've got 0, that's great. I just love talking cyber and geeking out on things. So always feel free to reach out. Okay, that's enough about me. My goal for this presentation is really for everybody on this call to understand what penetration testing is and what the goals are, but also, what do you expect when you're commissioning a company like Cybersecurity Canada to come in and do a test? We're not going to go through specific tools or techniques, the TTPs, which we hackers love to talk about, the techniques, tactics, and processes that we use when running a pen test. This is really around the non-technical aspect. And I find that that's important because that's something that is not always taught in school. You can't go on Hack the Box or Try Hack Me, which are platforms that are out there to learn penetration testing. They don't allow you to sit with a client. They don't make you write a report, that you don't go through the methodology of running a pen test. So I think it's important for technical people to always have a primer on, hey, what should I be doing? But at the same time, we'll be talking about different techniques and things like that. But the real goal of this presentation is to understand what goes or what happens when you're running a pen test. I also like memes. And that actually does look like me at 1 a.m. when I'm, hacking away. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We might get to them now or at the end of the presentation. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. We also will ask questions here and there. We have a list of questions that we're going to be asking. So before we get started, it's kind of important to define a few things. And if ever I run and I talk about certain things that you've never heard of, please call me out on it. Type your message. Ask me what that actually means. I don't want to leave anybody behind, but at the same time, if you're extremely versed in pen testing, bear with me when I define things that might be pretty simple to you with your experience. So trying to walk that fine line. So when we talk about penetration testing, there's a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different types of tests that you can do. This is a great question on an interview if you're interviewing somebody who's new to the industry, because their answer is very telling as to what they understand. So, oh, sorry, my keys aren't working. I got to click instead. So there you go. So we can do a network penetration test and we can do an application penetration test. It can be a web application, it could be a mobile application. It could also be a desktop application, which you don't see as much anymore. But most of the time, these are kind of going to interrelate between each other, because if I'm looking at a web application, I'm still going to be scanning. I'm still going to be scanning the network to see if there's any open ports. Maybe there's an admin console sitting on a non-standard port. So I'm still looking at the network up to a certain point. So same thing if I'm doing a network penetration test and I find an FTP server, I might want to poke at that FTP server, which kind of becomes an application pen test at that point, I guess. So they kind of interrelate between each other. We can also approach our test from the internal. So I'm sitting at a desk in a cubicle in the lobby, wherever, right? And I'm jacked into the network and I'm looking at it from an internal standpoint. Or I can prod and poke from the external world, from the public internet, seeing, can I get into this infrastructure from there? And then physical, which is its own thing in and of itself. I've done a few. I don't sleep for a week beforehand. I'm sweating like crazy. Hacking the humans and trying to trick people into letting me into a building is very different than sitting at my desk as a keyboard warrior and being completely behind the scenes. So they're fun. They're exciting. They make for great stories, but man, they're tough. And then we're going to talk about the amount of information that you have when you're running a test. So you can look at black box, white box, gray box. Black box test it's a box you can't see through. Black is a color that doesn't reflect anything. So you have no knowledge of what's inside the environment. White box is the complete opposite. The color white will actually reflect everything back to you. All the colors together. So you have all the information, including, IP address ranges, you have source code, you have all that stuff available. And I think it's pretty easy to imagine that whether it's a black box test or a white box test, these things take a long time, because if I have to go and scrub through all the code, that's going to take a long time. So what we typically do is a gray box test. I get some information, whether it's an IP address range, so I don't have to try to, whether I'm missing certain addresses or anything like that. But I'm not getting source code. I'm not getting what applications live in the environment and everything else. So we usually typically will approach everything from a gray box perspective, just in the essence of time and being more efficient. Sorry, I keep using my keys and they don't work. But wait, there's more, more definitions. Bear with me. We'll get through this pretty quickly. And if you get bored, you can look at the really nice meme there with the cat popping out of the old school 1992 laptop or desktop. There are types of teams, right? So it's important to really understand the difference between a red team engagement and a penetration test. A red team engagement will basically means that you have a certain goal that you want to achieve, which is getting to the database that holds the financial data for the company, right? That's your goal. And the company doesn't really care how you get there. You just want to show that you can get there. So a penetration test is different in the sense that we're going to be scanning the whole environment and looking at all the vulnerabilities and seeing which ones might be exploitable. So even though we exploit one, we're not content with content with that one achievement. You want to try the other ones. Red team is typically one avenue. You get in, you get the data, you get out. Doesn't mean that there's not 20 other avenues to get in. But you're not walking out those avenues. In pen testing, you would. The blue team, the red team is the attacking team. The blue team is going to be the team that actually protects the environment. So the people that are looking at the logs, the monitors, your SOC, Security Operations Center, all those analysts and everything else are trying to defend. And something that's come up a lot in the industry in the last, I would say, 5 years is purple teaming, where the red team is actually trying something and then they talk to the blue team and they say, hey, did you see my port scan here? And the blue team's going to get like, no, I have no idea you were even near there. And then you fine tune the tools and you keep working on it until you're actually catching all these attacks that the red team is throwing at them. Of course, red and blue ink purple. They call it a purple team. Purple teaming. I've seen it attempted multiple times. I don't think I've ever seen it done really, really great. It works well with an internal team. But there is a lot of value if you do this, and it can take a long time. I'm seeing your questions and or your comments and things like that. So thanks, James. Two other colors that the military use. We use these three terms. It would be interesting actually to have that conversation. What else can we do? Well, social engineering is hacking the human. What you're going to be seeing is if a company wants to be very secure, they're going to have a really very secure perimeter. So you have the good firewall, you have all these things. Hard to imagine if you're following the industry news these days and all these firewalls getting and VPNs getting popped. But the human will always be the weakest link. So social engineering your way in is just a way to do it. So this is phishing. This is calling people, asking for their passwords, pretending to be from tech support, doing all these things. That's social engineering. One thing that I just want to talk about a little bit from a penetration testing point of view. Personally, I like the assume breach angle of running a penetration test. And that simply means that we know that at some point somebody's going to click on a link, somebody's going to, reuse a password that's already been leaked on the internet. We know all these things. And if we assume that we're going to be breached and we start at that point, we're saving a lot of time, and we're being efficient, and we're helping people be more secure by saying, give me a low privileged Active Directory user and let me see what I can do from that point of view. Let's assume that I have that information instead of me spending about a week trying to get that information, trying to run social engineering. There is value in social engineering. There is value in doing open source intelligence. But from a penetration testing standpoint, where you want to test a web application or you want to test a network, let's assume that I have those credentials in hand, and then I can spend my time trying to see if a ransomware crew gets in, like how bad is it going to be? Quick note on vulnerability assessments. Vulnerability assessment is a part of penetration testing. It's before the fun starts, really. So a vulnerability assessment, you're scanning an environment to see if there's any vulnerabilities in there, but you're not trying to exploit them. You're not trying to do anything with them. So you create a report, you say, hey, we scanned the environment, we saw all of these things. We trust our tools are telling us that these things are real, but we haven't gone in and verified that it's real. This is why when you look at different certifications, they'll talk about, an annual pen test and then quarterly vulnerability assessment. Because vulnerability assessment does give you some assurance, but penetration testing goes one step further, and it's more costly and it takes more time. So my approach, I use the penetration testing execution standard, which lists out 7 phases. If you Google the penetration testing execution standard, there's way more information than I can ever cover in a presentation like this. It is very good. It's getting old, but it is a methodology, so it doesn't really talk about tools and things like that. So it's still very much relevant today. One thing that I want to hit upon is why are we doing penetration testing, right? Why is it important? Well, some people see as a checkbox. Hey, my client's asking me to do one, or my certification body is asking me to do one. So I just want to, put a check mark and say, hey, I'm compliant. As you can imagine, that's probably not the best approach. You want to find a company that goes in and actually gives you value and makes you stronger. That checkbox in your compliance or in your certification, or telling a client that you did a pen test and there was no findings, that'll get you the contract. But if it wasn't really well done and you wake up the next day and you're a headline on CBC because you leaked all this client data, that's not going to help you get any more clients, right? So we want to do penetration testing the right way. We want to find a good company with credentials that go in and actually run the full test and do everything. So very, very important to understand that when you're picking a company. I do see the question on which certification is best for red team penetration testing. I'll cover it in the QA at the end. I want to get through the presentation, and then we can have more pointed questions like that if you're okay with that. But I do see the question because that's a conversation in and of itself, and I do have some opinions. So the penetration testing execution standard has 7 phases. If you look at like Pentest Plus certification, they're going to have their own phases. If you look at CEH, they're going to have their own phases. But a bit like if you're familiar in networking with the OSI model, it's a model of 7 layers. If you look at TCP/IP, it's got 5 layers, but they all kind of intermesh. And it's the same thing with these phases, right? They might call it a different thing. They might create exploitation and post-exploitation is two different tests. Hey, Duncan, great question. I'll cover it in a bit, especially in reporting. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that these phases, they're all going to be the same. They're just different names and they might be grouped together differently, but you're always going to do these 7 phases. So phase 1, pre-engagement interaction. I always like to say, this is where a real world hacker, this is where they're not going to do this phase. There's no Russian hacker that wants to hack into, I don't know, RBC or something, that will sit down with RBC and say like, all right, here are the rules of engagements and here are our goals. No, they're not going to do this. This is one thing that differentiates us, you know, good faith security researchers and people that actually get paid to do this stuff. So this is an extremely important part of the engagement and sets the tone. So you really want to ask the right questions around scope. What, you know, when is this due? Like, when do you expect this to be done? Open up the table for general questions from the company and even for yourself as the penetration tester. You want to make sure that you understand the environment correctly. Are there any third parties in the environment? I've seen places where the heating system in the internal network is run by a third party company, which they didn't give their okay to be pen tested. So that's kind of a delineation where you go, okay, I can't access this subnet or these systems I'm not allowed to touch because I don't have the right to do it. Talk about goals, rules of engagements. What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? If I get a list of hashed passwords, am I allowed to crack them? You put all of that in, and then all the contact information. So once you have that information, let's go and gather some information. Let's go and gather some intelligence, I should say. And when we talk about intelligence gathering in this sense, this is open source intelligence. If you're not familiar with open source intelligence, it is grabbing information from the public internet or wherever else where you're not doing anything illegal or anything like that. You're just grabbing as much information as you can from the company. So trying to find a good example here. Let's just say that you're not 100% sure what their technology, what they're using, right? So you may want to look at job listings. And if they're looking for a senior PHP developer, I mean, I could be wrong, but chances are they use PHP in the environment, right? You may want to look at GitHub repos from some of their staff to see if there's any hard-coded credentials that they might be reusing. And you can gather a lot of information without even touching the company, without them even knowing that you're trying to do things. Let your imagination go, and you can just imagine how much information you can get. So this information, you're going to use them when running the vulnerability assessment, the exploitation. You know, if it's PHP, you might have a good understanding already. You're creating this picture in your head of what you're going to go in. And the more information you gather during this phase, the more vectors of attack it's going to open up. So I'm thinking of domain names, right? Companies that might not have their company name in their domain, but you can tell by you know, the DNS server might be hosting the same bunch of domain names, and that might allow you to gather more information. And then a lot of times, like if you go on LinkedIn or things like that, you can see photos of people that work for the company. If you're doing a physical pen test, they might, you know, put in their welcome package, which includes the badge. If you see the badge, well, you can clone it, right? You can say, hey, they're using this type of badge. When I walk into the environment, I'm going to fit in. So there's a bunch of information that might be available. Now you got to be careful. Some information source may be manipulated to reflect, you know, erroneous data, whether that's deliberate or accidental, and information can become obsolete, right? Or simply be completely incomplete. Yeah, they do have PHP, but they're also using some JavaScript or things like that, right? So important to understand that this is still kind of limited. The next phase, and this also helps us focus on the right parts of the infrastructure. But I like to say that for me personally, and other people might see it differently, but threat modeling, I don't really see it as a phase. I think it starts when you're meeting with the client, and then it all the way through the reporting, right? So threat modeling is basically identifying the assets that you might want to attack. So if it's a company that handles a certain type of widget, which is very rare or unique, then their intellectual property might be one of the assets that you're interested in. And it's going to help you focus your pen test. But as you can imagine, as you're gathering more information, whether it's through vulnerability analysis or even through intelligence gathering, that might your idea of what the attack vectors and what you're going after, those might change as you're learning more information. So it's important to always have a threat modeling mindset when you're running penetration testing engagements or any other security testing, really. This is a bit where the creative aspect of this type of work comes in, because you really have to think of creative ways of trying to access the environment. All right, so I don't know if we want to throw questions out there, Polina. Might be a good idea. I'm also looking at your poll results. If you haven't answered the polls, that really helps me kind of cater the language to the right team, to the right audience, and things like that. So yeah, it's always good to have interaction. You're all muted too, so
yeah.
Go ahead, Victor.
I see there's a couple of questions. The first one: what certification is best for red team pen testing? Is there one?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think I think that's a huge conversation. Everybody has different priorities, and it depends. For penetration testing, for me right now, and you hear a lot of OSCP out there. OSCP the quality has gone down a tiny bit, and this is just my personal opinion. Don't hold me to this. Don't bring me to court because I'm calling people out. But one that I find has a lot of value is the Cyber Mentors, this TCM Academy. Their Professional Network Penetration Tester, PNPT, is an amazing cert. It's a 5-day cert. It's just like a real pen test. They do expect you to sleep. You put in your 8 hours, you run a pen test. And then once you have your report, you actually sit down with them and present the report over a 15-minute period where they ask questions and things like that. And it really prepares you for a real pen test engagement. Really, really love that cert. From a more junior standpoint, the INE EJPT, so eLearn Junior Pen Tester, is a great cert. The training is 100% free. Please, we can talk about it afterwards, but I would advise beginners to go with that one. Take the training. You don't even have to pay for the training. If you want to be certified, you just pay to take the exam. It's great. Those would be my recommendations. Testing time versus reporting time. I see those questions too.
Okay.
Typically, in a 40-hour engagement, I typically leave about 8 hours so 1 day for the week. Anything longer than that, maybe a day and a half. Now, it's not me sitting at the computer and writing. I leave myself 8 hours mostly because if I haven't taken good notes enough, or I haven't taken the right screenshots, I have to go back in and collect all that evidence for the report. So the report writing is not 100% hands-on keyboards, just writing. Most of the time, you will use a cookie cutter report anyways, but it really is to gather your thoughts, and sometimes you'll run through your notes and go like, oh, I wanted to go down that rabbit hole, I didn't. So it gives you a couple of hours here and there to do that. So I always give myself a good 8 hours to a day and a half. If it's less than that, maybe half a day is good enough. But it all depends. And higher price tag for pen tests. I mean, yeah, it's not cheap to get this work done, to be completely honest. But it's definitely worth it if you're approaching it from the right standpoint. Like earlier, if you just want to get it for compliance, which I absolutely do not recommend, do not do that. You could probably find some better price tags, but if you want to have good value, you want to go with a company that's very well regarded and has experience. And unfortunately, that's going to cost a bit more money. And yeah, listen, the best cert, Anil, I sorry if I mispronounce your name, Anil. If the company's asking you for OSCP, you go for OSCP. The best cert is the one that people are asking, and the one that's going to get you the job and get you to keep the job and get you the promotion. That's the best cert. Other than that, the first one, Sean, is PNPT that Anil said. Cool. I'm going to keep going with the questions. We can discuss a bit later on. I want to get through this presentation. And really love the interactivity. Thank you so much. We spoke about vulnerability analysis earlier. We're discovering flaws in the system, which can then be leveraged by an attacker. So it can be active or passive, in the sense of passive would be if I'm in your internal network, I'm logged in, or I'm hooked into the network port. I'm using Wireshark or TCP dump to look at the wire to see what kind of things are happening there. You could see IP addresses, you can see different protocols that are being used and everything else, which is good information. And when we're talking about active, I'm actually poking at a server, I'm touching it, I'm pinging it, I'm port scanning it, and I'm looking at what it's responding back. That's louder. In a penetration test, we're not too worried about getting caught. In a red team engagement, you have to be very careful, but we're talking about pen testing here. Most of the time, it's going to be an automated process. You're going to use tools like Nessus, Nexpose, OpenVAS, Akinetics, all these scanners, web application scanners like OWASP, ZAP, and Burp Suite Pro, or just Burp Suite, will have scanners too. They are tools that you can do automatic or manual work on them. I always run a good Burp Suite Pro or OWASP ZAP scan on my web applications. It gives me a ton of information. What are we looking for? Well, we're looking for insecure services, Telnet FTP, stuff like that, common misconfiguration. We're fingerprinting services and technologies. We want name, we want version numbers. We want, if I know that there's a system that runs Windows Server 2003, then yeah, chances are there's going to be a bunch of exploits that I can throw at that thing. If I know that you're running a specific version of Apache's web server, then I know which vulnerabilities it's affected for. So we're really fingerprinting stuff. Once I have that information, I can, if it's an automated scanner, a lot of times they'll have signatures and they'll tell me, hey, these things might be vulnerable to these exploits. But I can also go to certain databases like ExploitDB, the CVSS or the CVE database, and they're going to give me the version numbers that are affected by certain things. Default passwords, great one is printers. Every printer in every environment I've gone to, I can log in with admin and min. Things like ILOs, like IPMI services, they typically will have default passwords to give you a lot of information. So yeah, we're just looking, we're checking doorknobs, and that's why that thing is there, right? You're walking down the mall, or you're walking down the arena parking lot, and you're looking at cars, and you see like, oh, that one's window's open. I could pop in there, or like pull on the doorknob and see, oh, that door's unlocked, right? That's all we're doing. We're just looking at where we could attack things. And this is where we stop if we're doing a vulnerability assessment, but that's not fun. We like to break stuff, right? So we run into the exploitation, and exploitation really is, we're trying to make systems do things they're not designed to do, and we're trying to bypass security measures that are in place. I think I say that on the next slide, actually. Yeah, we're bypassing security restrictions. And that can be as easy as admin and min, right? There's a username password. We're bypassing that by just using the default password. Or it can be something really complicated, like writing a buffer overflow, right? Which more or less gives you the same result. You've broken into something. One thing that's important is that if the prior phase, the vulnerability analysis, the intelligence gathering, and you've threat modeled things right, this should be extremely well planned. You're not just throwing a dart at a dartboard, to use the analogy, right? You're not throwing a bunch of stuff and see where it lands. You should know exactly what you're doing, what you're trying to attack, what exploits you're trying to run, and why. It's a precision strike as opposed to just randomly running stuff. And this is mostly all manual work. Some tools assist. I'm thinking of something like Metasploit, which is a tool that helps you run exploits and things like that and catch shells back. But I've seen Metasploit Pro, point and click. Say, hey, I want to hit this server. Go ahead, do all this. It's not great, and you don't want to do that anyways because you're not learning anything and you don't know how stuff works in the background. So it's very important to really understand, have a good base of, I would say, networking and application security and things like that. I also want to touch around if we talk about web applications, let's touch upon the OWASP top 10 a little bit. If you're not familiar with the OWASP top 10, OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. I think they changed their name to something else. I'll have to Google it. I just saw somebody referring to it as not the Open Web Application Security Project, but it's basically a group of volunteers, some pretty hard hitters in the industries that use this as a way to put out projects. And one of their flagship projects is called the OWASP Top 10. The OWASP Top 10 is the list of what security researchers in the industry sees as the most common or the top 10 common vulnerabilities that they run into when they're running security tests. And the list is great. The OWASP Top 10 is an awareness document, but you can still use it internally at a company to and Cybersecure Canada actually asks people to ensure that they're not affected by the OWASP top 10, which is stuff like if you're familiar with if you're a bit more technical, the insecure direct object reference, misconfiguration of components, business logic flaws. I could go on and on. There's 10 of them. I highly recommend that you go and you read the document and understand how to protect yourselves from these types of vulnerabilities. So tools like the OWASP ZAP framework can scan your web application and let you know which of the top 10 you're affected by and gives you some assurance that you're not affected by those top 10. Is it the be all and end all to be secure? Not really. I mean, we put locks on our doors, but it doesn't mean that nobody can just bash through that door, right? Or we protect our networks, but if you want to be completely secure, you might want to talk to people in a skiff, which you don't have no radio waves that can come in, right? So that's the way that you need to approach everything. Even a penetration test, even a threat risk assessment, anything is not ever going to be the be all and end all. Me as a penetration tester, chances are I'm going to miss some stuff. I only have so much time. And same thing with the OWASP top 10. Just because it's the top 10 things doesn't mean that the next 10 aren't things that we should worry about. But it gives us assurance that we're at least somewhat protected. Okay, so if you have any questions on the OWASP top 10, please, yeah, there you go, Ricky. Thank you. The cheat sheets are great too. All right, so the next phase of fun, because then we get into reporting, and unless, hey, it could be some people might enjoy reporting. It might be the less enjoyable part of a pen test is writing the report, because then the fun's all over and you just got to tell people. But there's a fun in that, I guess. So post-exploitation, I like to say that we're moving in, right? Earlier we were checking doorknobs. Now we're actually, you know, trying to pick locks and trying to get in to the environment. And just to take that analogy further, now we're moving in. We're bringing our stuff in. We're making sure that, you know, we can move inside the network. So I don't really like to read slides, but one of the things that I find is extremely important is the second paragraph. So let's say that I gain access to a machine, and the value of that machine is determined by the data that's stored on it. But not only that, and this is the most important part, the value of the machine could be its usefulness in further compromising the network. So let's try to give an example. And one I always like to use is that system that is playing the slideshow in the lobby, showing how awesome the company is. Well, chances are there's not a whole lot of important information on that system, but usually those systems can be fairly easily attacked because companies think like, hey, that's just the computer that plays PowerPoint, right? But what if that system is also hooked into another network? It's got 2 IP addresses on it, and it allows you a view inside of a network that you can't access where you're sitting right now. Well, all of a sudden, that machine might be the most useful machine in the network for you at the moment, because it's allowing you to settle in and then start looking further into the network. Same thing with, it might have the admin credentials stored on a file somewhere, right? And all of a sudden you have an admin credential before you didn't even have anything at all. So every time that you exploit something and you gain access to something, it might bring you something more, which brings us to the next slide. Actually, I just want to cover one more thing. In exploitation, well, in any phases, I'm just going to go back one slide. In any of these phases, if ever you see something that you could do and you believe that it would be successful and it goes against the rules of engagements, you stop. You do not keep going. You do not want to go against the rules of engagements and the rules that the company have put in place. If you don't know if you're going too far, you need to contact the company. You have the contact information of everybody, which you gathered through the pre-engagement interactions, and you call them up and you go, am I allowed to do this? And you get it in writing. Very important. Do not ever break the rules of engagement. There's a company, I forget their name, the actual name of the company, but there's a couple of guys. They were guys. I'm trying to be careful of the word guys. I get my hand slapped all the time at work because yeah, you're not supposed to use guys, but these were guys. And they had an engagement, a physical pen test, where they needed to break into a justice department, or like a court, right? Like the courthouse of the city. And their rules of engagement basically said you're not allowed to go on the 3rd floor. That was the only thing. Of course, they went on the 3rd floor. They got arrested. They got thrown in jail. They had to be bailed out, and everything ended up being good. But they went against the rules of engagement. They got into pretty serious trouble. If the cop, you never know, right? He could have had a loaded gun and he could have gone really, really bad for them. They went against the rules of engagements. There's a great Darknet Diary episode on it. Darknet Diary is a great podcast if you want to listen to stories about all this type of stuff. There you go, episode 41. Who's this? Duncan. And they go through the whole thing. So yeah, follow the rules of engagements, please. So what do we do after we've vulnerability analysis, exploit, post exploitation? What do we do now? Well, like I said, we might have a new venture or new angle or a new viewpoint into the network, with whether it's new credentials or access to another part of the network, or in a web application pen test, you might have all of a sudden access to a part of the site that you didn't have first. So what do? Well, you just keep going, rinse and repeat. At the risk of being of using a trademark, Try Harder, company that does the OSCP certification, offensive security. That's their motto. It's Try Harder. I'm still going to use it here. So what do? You just keep going. Once you have a new viewpoint into the environment, you run some vulnerability analysis on that part. You try some exploitations, you post-exploit. If you gather more information, you just keep going. And even if you don't exploit anything, you might want to go back through your vulnerability analysis, look through your nodes, think like, oh, I only scanned these ports. Maybe I should scan all the other ports. Maybe I should look at UDP. Maybe I should look at these things. You just keep going. Never watched Office Space. If you've watched Office Space, I'm sure you can hear it in your head, that okay. That's been stuck in my head since 1990, whatever, when this movie came out. So yeah. So when do you stop? That's a question. When do you stop? Does anybody have the answer? I'm just looking at the messages here. If you've heard this presentation before, you're not allowed to answer. When do you stop? Rinse and repeating. Never. You stop when the client runs out of money. It's simple as that. I can go all day. I can go all year. I can go like for the rest of my life. I can rinse and repeat like this. But yeah, at some point the client's going to run out of money, and you're going to run out of stuff to look at. So yeah, you just keep going. Search on CISO. We that's a good question. I don't really have an answer. I don't think there's any certification that's going to give you the CISO title. I think it's experience and it's working the system. There are some from, I think it's EC Council has like the CCSO. But if you think of what a CISO's job is, you might want to look into stuff like CISSP from ISC squared, or CISM, CISM from ISACA. Fuck, they program. See, sarcasm doesn't really run through, but I think that to be a CISO for a company, you might need more than 5 days training. Just my opinion. You can say I'm wrong. So let's go into reporting. I'm almost done here. Almost done. This is the last part. So this is the meat of the engagement, right? It's the report. And the question you're going to get is this one. When can we expect the report? And the answer is, when do you need it, right? And it's your client. You need to give them the report when they expect it. Except if they give you a 40-hour or 80-hour pen test to do in 2 hours, and then they ask you, you know, I'm exaggerating here, but we've seen some pretty crazy deadlines out there, which it's okay to say it's not possible, right? So why is the report important? Well, most of the time when you're running a pen test engagement, they'll give you either a staging environment or things like that, especially for a web app. Or even if you're doing an internal pen test, you've cleaned up all the stuff that you might have done. You know, you're taking that account out that you created, any backdoors or anything like that. You're cleaning up the environment. You're leaving it pristine, leave no trace, right? So what happens is that the report is the only tangible output that the test happened. It's the only real evidence that the test actually took place. In a year's time, except for the contract, even the contract doesn't mean that the pen test happened. It's just mean that there was intent to do one. The report is the evidence. So it's extremely important. My cat's just walked into here, so if you hear some weird noise, that's why. So 3 types of people are going to digest this report. You're going to have senior management, which is they're going to read the executive summary, which at the end of the day in non business speak is how screwed are we? That's all they want to know. Like, how bad is it, right? Is it good? And how much money is this going to cost me? So you tell them, hey, we found 42 criticals, right? I'm just kidding. But you basically give them a good understanding of what you did, what you tested, and what the high level results are. The next group of people that are going to read this is the IT management. So they want to know a bit more details on the findings themselves, just to try to figure out how much resources is this going to take, how long it's going to take. And then the last part is going to be detailed technical details of how to reproduce the results. So screenshots, what commands were run, all this stuff. And that's going to be run by the IT staff so they can fix the actual issues. It's very important for them to recreate the exploits or recreate the findings and also understand how to fix it. So there you go, folks. These are the 7 phases of the pen test. Any questions on these phases? I see a couple questions here, which I'll go through. Great. So any questions on the phases themselves? Feel free to ask any questions around these, and then we'll cover everything else that's in there. Great. Victor, any questions?
No, just well, I can go into, I go into rabbit holes, so you don't want to ask me anything right now. But I can tell you, post exploitation is also, well, I've seen it personally utilized in a client that was compromised, and the IT did a complete cleanup, except for whatever reason their cleanup wasn't as thorough as it should be. And 3 months after the the exploit, I saw a reverse shell open up on someone's desktop, and we reported it to the RCFP, and then they said they know about this person because the guy was not very smart. He actually had his name in it and in the scripts and everything. It was really very silly, and the IP address was not. He didn't use a VPN. He used his own server to do everything, and that's something that we've seen after an actual attack. And then I don't know anything that happened to the guy, but that was another post exploitation that I personally saw. But
Right.
no, you go through the questions. I can ask lots, but there's some good. Like I like this automotive pen testing,
Yeah.
which is, this is going to be, considering everything is, electric vehicles, everything. It's bad enough there are a million computers on every gas engine, gasoline powered car, but now with the electronic, I think this is, it's going to be fun times coming up. But yeah, any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I have thoughts galore. So first off, when we talk about automotive pen testing and everything else, whether it's automotive, whether you're pen testing I'm trying to just, yeah, I can speak about that, like a taser, like a police taser. If you're pen testing different things, it's still all the same phases, so it doesn't change. So it's all the same, same methodology, same report, same pre-engagement interactions with the clients and everything else. So nothing really changes from the point of view of methodology. The big part that changes is the technology that you're using to pen test. So it really is at that point knowledge, right? And whether you're hacking a Tesla or you're hacking a Windows XP server, you're going to be looking for vulnerabilities. You're going to be writing or using exploits. You're going to use post exploitation. So it all comes down to the same. And
So
my thoughts around how secure cars and things like that are today, they're just not. It's as simple as that. They're just not. Medical
so
devices. Go ahead, Victor.
yeah, no, I just wanted to ask, have you done any
Not on the automotive side, no. I haven't on the automotive side at all. I played around with the bus CAN bus connector on my car just to see what kind of values I could get, but never really tried to do anything with it, to be completely honest. I'd love to. Right now, it's a question of time. One
right?
place where
Well,
I think there's a lot of opportunities for new people in the industry is to learn stuff like mobile, mobile pen testing is something that we don't see a lot of these days. There are people that do it, but there's not a lot of training, and there's going to be a huge need for mobile pen testing going future. That kind of segues into automotive, right? The last if you followed the industry news and you look at, I forget their names, but there's a person that looked at the Toyota app and found out that they could lock and unlock and start cars anywhere if they only had the VIN, which is easily accessible. And then they go like, okay, let's look at the automotive industry, and just a group of people, it's on their own time, ended up, I mean, if somebody can pull it off, if somebody knows off the top of their head, I'm talking like hundreds of vulnerabilities in all kinds of cars. It's atrocious. I've been focusing a bit on the
Especially,
medical side. Yeah, and medical is as
yeah,
bad.
so especially now with the connectivity in the cars, how you can talk to your phone, the CarPlay and everything else, which I think Tesla and GM are taking CarPlay out because they want to keep your data in their environment. That could potentially, um, open up a lot of issues for people with privacy, at least, and because now all the data is collected in one place. So your
Yeah,
car is now your gold mine.
yeah, exactly. Trying to go through here. Threat modeling roles in penetration testing and mitigation vulnerabilities. So threat modeling is not going to threat modeling is not going to help mitigate vulnerabilities up to a certain point. All threat modeling does, it helps you think like an attacker and try to understand what avenues of attack might be possible. Um, and again, like I said earlier in the presentation, threat modeling is something you do all the time as you're going through penetration testing. You're always thinking like an attacker. You're always thinking. So in the sense of um, something really, really simple, like if you run a classic Nmap scan, it only scans for the top 1,000 ports. So when you start threat modeling, you go, well, they might hide some ports on the upper range that Nmap doesn't really look. So I might want to scan all ports. It's a very, very simple explanation or example, but that's a great way to threat model. Go like, oh, if I was an attacker, maybe I want to look at all the other ports, not just the standard ones that Nmap does. So that's a bit of threat modeling. If you see that there's a WordPress server and you go wp-admin and it just gives you a 404, there are some plugins that you can do and remap wp-admin to something else like /Julien, let's just say. So you might want to run a directory buster. Just because wp-admin is not there, you go like, oh, they might be using this way, and I might want to try to attack it in different ways. So you're just thinking like an attacker. That's all. So it
Yeah,
might help you find more vulnerabilities, I guess. Yeah. Or threats. Yeah.
today actually, someone thought their site. I was talking to someone who was implementing a website, and he said, "Oh, we've obscured WP admin." So, okay, so now what? So I scan your site. I'll find the page. I'll find the access to it, the form. So, what have you done? And one of the things we learned was security by obscurity doesn't work because we have scanners today and they will
Exactly.
find
I
it.
mean, unless you're using a GUID that is never going to guess, and you know, but yeah, obscurity is never not good. AI and penetration testing, absolutely. We're seeing a lot of it in penetration testing these days. I haven't really personally used it, but I can see scenarios where I would use it. Um, sometimes some tasks take a long time. Hey, I want to write a Python script that does a certain thing because I want to enumerate certain. I can ask ChatGPT, hey, can you write me a script that does this? I guarantee you it's not going to work, but it might have saved me 99% of the work, and I just have to fine tune it here and there for it to work. So,
Yeah, so I
yeah.
think I think we've hit our time.
Yep.
Um, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you learned something from this talk. We have a few more coming up that are kind of leaning towards their general knowledge for all IT, but it's leaning towards the Cybersecure Canada certification. It's a lot of an awareness, the program. We want people to understand the requirements of cyber security and how they can protect the organization. When it comes to data, you have your own tools, technologies to protect the information. We just want to make sure that the organization is resilient to a cyber attack, and in turn will help you market yourself and say, listen, we take cyber seriously. You know, we're not one of the lowest hanging fruits. So I'd like to thank Julien and Paulina for putting this together for us. And I think we're already past our time. Thank you everyone for joining us, and check out our coming up webinars. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Victor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.